So today I'm out here with the three boys and I'm going to try and explain how a four-stroke or four-cycle engine works. I just want to go over the basics. So I've got this this old junky lawnmower engine, and we're going to take it apart. We're going to talk about the internal structure of it, and although it's different than an automobile engine, we could still get the basics down pat. So the first thing is, this is what's called a four-stroke engine. It's an internal combustion engine, which they've been using for like ever, and it runs on gasoline. So this is very different than a diesel engine. And the main difference between this and a diesel engine, besides the fact that it runs on gasoline instead of diesel fuel, is that this requires a source of ignition, an electric ignition system. Okay? Now, you might be wondering, how does it work? There's no battery. How do any of these lawnmowers that have no batteries, how do they make electricity in order to make the spark plug make a spark? Well, the way this does it is it uses something called a magneto type of ignition. Underneath this thing here, when we take it off, you're going to see there's a thing called a flywheel. It's got some big magnets in it. And when the magnets spin around, when we pull this starter and we make the magnets spin around, as the magnets go past a coil called the magneto coil, it will cause the magneto coil to produce a high voltage spark, and that's sent through this wire right here to the spark plug, and then it jumps a little tiny gap on the inside, and we'll get to that in a minute. On a diesel engine, there's actually the actual compression of the gas is so intense it actually causes the fuel to actually ignite with no spark at all. Because if you take any volume and you subject it to enough pressure, the temperature will start to go up. And if you get that temperature to go up to the point where the fuel ignites, then you get ignition. Okay? But this is four-stroke gasoline internal combustion engine. The four strokes are suck, okay, compress, bang, and blow. It's the intake stroke, the compression stroke, the power stroke, and the exhaust stroke. Okay, so it's intake, compress, power, exhaust. But the easy way to think of it is suck, press, bang, blow. All right, so when we suck, inhale, right? Okay, so the first cycle that the engine does is it's like it's inhaling. So what happens is, inside here we've got the cylinder, and we've got a piston inside there, okay? And there's a couple of valves we're going to look at inside here. When both valves are closed, okay, then that area where the cylinder is, with the piston acting like a big cork, it's basically it's a closed space, right? And what happens is, on the first cycle, on the first stroke, that suck that we just talked about, what happens is the intake valve is going to be in the open position, and the piston is going to be traveling down the cylinder. And when it travels down the cylinder, it's going to make suction. Got it? Do you guys remember this thing? Yeah. This is for pulling out oil, or right? It's for removing liquids. The way this works is, there's actually inside this round part here, which is the cylinder, inside here there's a piston, okay, and it's attached to this rod right here. So when I move this up and down, when I move this up and down, there's actually a piston moving in and up and down inside there, okay? And then there are a couple of built-in valves so that it only pulls in one direction and pushes in the other direction. So if I take one of these hoses, I put one of these hoses in a bucket of water or fluid, and then the other hose, I put it wherever I want to transfer the fluid to. And as I pump up and down on this, it's going to actually do that. So if you take this right here, okay, go ahead and pull on that, pump that some. Go ahead. All right. What's happening when I hold my finger over this and he pumps it, that piston is moving down and it's creating a vacuum on my finger. As soon as I let my finger up, air rushes in there because it wants to fill the vacuum. All right? There's actually a saying. It's nature abhors a vacuum. Abhor means hates or doesn't like. Okay? It doesn't want it. So when there's a vacuum, nature wants to fill it. The air around wants to get in there. Put your finger on there, cap that off. Do you feel it sucking on there?
A little bit.
Let your finger up, you'll feel it. You feel it? How it kind of like was trying to pull your finger in? You want to check it? Go ahead, put your finger on there. Do you feel it pulling on your finger a little bit? Hey, pull your finger off.
You can see the mark on
See,
your
yeah. It's trying to suck your finger in there. As soon as you open, your finger's acting like that intake valve in this engine. So that piston goes down, okay? And because the intake valve is open, it's going to suck in what we want to go in the engine. What we want to go in the engine is we want a mixture of gas and air. We need the air because air has oxygen, and we need the gas because the gas is the fuel. And what we're doing is we're combining fuel with oxygen, and it's going to make the perfect thing for us to make power when we ignite it. All right, so this is the gas tank. This device on top of the gas tank right here is called the carburetor. All right, and what the carburetor does is the carburetor mixes a little bit of the fuel with air that comes in through, this is the air cleaner. Okay, so when I pull this starter cord on the intake stroke, the piston goes down and it's going to suck in air through here. And as the air runs through the carburetor and goes into the cylinder, it's going to create enough of a vacuum to pull a little bit of fuel out of the tank, a little spray of fuel out of the tank. Little droplets of fuel are going to run into there with it. And those little droplets of fuel mixed with the air are actually quite powerful when they're ignited. But the key to making them powerful, if we take a little bit of fuel and we dumped it right here and I light it, it's not very dramatic. But I take that same little tiny bit of fuel and I put it inside this cylinder and I close the cylinder up, and then that piston comes back up and compresses it. And what happens is all of those little oxygen molecules, they all start packing together in a tight little package of power. And the fuel's in there with it. And then it gets ignited by the spark plug. So what we got is, we got cycle number 1, suck. Piston goes down, the intake valve is open, right? It's going to pull in that air and that fuel. Anybody remember what cycle number 2 is? Press. Okay, or the compression stroke. What happens in cycle number 2 is that intake valve that was open to let this go in there, it closes, okay? Now, the piston starts coming back up in that cylinder, okay? And that fuel and air mixture has no place to go. So it starts to get squeezed down. Got it? Squeezed all together. And when the piston comes up near the very top of its stroke, and it's squeezed as much as it can be squeezed, right at that moment, this spark plug is going to make a spark. And it's going to ignite that compressed air and fuel mixture. That's going to make the what? The bang. Okay? The bang. The bang is going to take that piston and blow it like a bullet in a rifle. It's going to blow that piston down really fast and hard. And that's called the power stroke. The power stroke. Got it? And the power stroke is going to, through the connecting rod, it's going to turn the crankshaft. The crankshaft is designed so that it can only go so far, and then it starts pushing the piston back up again. So that's the 4th cycle, or the 4th stroke. Remember what I called that?
The
blow,
blow
or exhaust.
Yeah, that's what I just said.
What happens then, okay, is the exhaust valve is going to open.
That's why when you started, some smoke comes out.
What? Well, a lot of smoke comes out.
Yeah.
The exhaust valve is going to open, and that piston's going to come back up again. Only this time, instead of compressing the air-fuel mixture, because what's in there now? We just had a bang, so what's left in there?
Gas.
No,
Nothing.
it ignited. What happened? What's left?
Nothing.
Well, actually, technically, it's the byproduct of the combustion. When we take air and fuel and we burn it, we get different kinds of gases, carbon monoxide and other stuff, bad stuff. Okay, that stuff doesn't
what
want.
comes out.
You can't burn again. It's burned. Ideally, all of it burned. So we have waste gases. So we got to get those out of there. Why do we got to get them out of there? Because we got to get ready for the next.
That's what the exhaust is for.
For the intake stroke, because it repeats. Intake, compression, power, exhaust. Intake, compression, power, exhaust, over and over again. So the exhaust stroke, now the piston's going to come back up. Okay, when the piston's coming back up and that exhaust valve is open, it's going to let that stuff come out of the exhaust pipe, the muffler. Okay, so this is where all the bad gases come out. So the clean air goes in here, mixes with fuel, and then the bad stuff comes out of here. Okay, so if I go back to my little toy here, right? Pump this. This is my intake, right? This is where it was causing suction, right? Well, go ahead, put your finger on there. Yeah. Whoop.
Broke it.
It would make so much pressure it blew the thing right off.
Broke it.
Okay, but that's what's happening. That piston in there, you see the piston? You can actually see it.
Yeah, I know.
That's pushing the exhaust gases out. If this was an engine. Okay, so we got the shroud with the pull starter off. Okay, and you guys are just asking about the magnets. So this is the flywheel right here. And if we actually look right here, you see these things right here? Those are counterweights, because if they just put the magnets on this side and they didn't have anything over here, when this would be spinning, it would be
Moving.
It would be really out of
be
whack.
shaking
It would be
the-
out of balance. So what they did was they put the, here we go. There you go.
Oh, that's strong.
Magnets. Yeah, sure.
Supposed to.
All right, so now that we've magnetized everything. All right, so when these magnets, when we pull that cord, or when the engine's running, when these magnets go flying past this device right here, this is the ignition coil. When they go flying past this, they'll actually make a spark. Okay? Now this one, because it's been kind of sitting for so long, it probably won't. Underneath this flywheel, where we're not going to get to today, but underneath here, you see this little device back here?
Yeah.
That's a cover. Underneath that cover, there are ignition points, okay, that actually control the moment where the spark occurs. All right. In a car, in an older car, or like our tractors, that's inside of what's called the distributor. And the reason why you have a distributor is because this only has one cylinder. So all of the energy from this just goes to the one cylinder. On like our tractor, a 4-cylinder engine, for instance, it's going to have 4 spark plugs, right?
Like the boat motor?
So yeah, the boat motor's got a distributor in it, right? Exactly. That's got 6 cylinders. Okay. So there's something in there so that it makes sure that each cylinder, at the right moment, gets a spark.
Okay.
And that's being turned by the engine. So as the engine's running, it's controlling which cylinder gets the spark. All right. So sometimes if you spin it by it, you can actually get it to do something.
I think that's the wrong side.
Yeah.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Hold that wire. No, hold it with your hands, bare hands like that.
Why?
There you go.
It's gonna shock me.
Yeah, probably. Nothing?
Oh yes.
You got it? You feel
Yeah.
it? Now, that's just a little one. If this is running,
It would kill you.
well, no, it won't kill you. It's DC voltage, and it's not enough current to kill you. But it's enough current to make a spark.
Tell Mark to do it.
Nope.
Hey, you're going to miss out.
It feels good after. It's actually
All right, that's
feeling-
kind of weird.
It's actually feeling really
You're
good.
weird.
That feels good.
All right, so we're gonna take the spark plug out.
Can I do it? Can I do it?
You can try, but it's awfully tight.
Hang on, let me see.
Peter, why don't you go ahead? Try and I'll hold the engine. Push down on that.
Oh my gosh.
I know, huh? Well, hasn't been out in a long time.
Maybe I can do it. I'm much stronger than Peter.
Hold on. Go ahead. Ah, there you go. Good. Okay, so the way the spark plug works, this white part right here is called the insulator. This can't conduct electricity. So this part where the wire is hooked up to, it goes to down the center, all right, and it goes to, see that little nub that's just sticking out there?
Yeah, want me to hold it?
Yeah, sorry. We're not going to develop enough to make a spark unless we like put that on and really give it a yank. Which, we could do that. So we don't need to bolt this all on to make that happen. Let's see if
I'll
we can.
yank it.
Hold on.
Ready?
Go ahead, try it. No. It could, more than likely it has to do with the points of the underneath here. They're probably dirty or filthy or corroded.
Oh, a lot of scratching going on.
What we really came to see on this thing is we came to see the cylinder and the piston, okay? Let's take the gas tank, the carburetor,
Can I take the
and the
carburetor?
bracket.
I'm taking this stuff off.
We've removed the fuel tank and the carburetor assembly. So the air goes through here, gets sucked through the carburetor. It picks up the droplets of gas that are being siphoned up through the tube that sticks down in the gas tank. And it all gets sucked in right here. So obviously this is the exhaust port because it's got a muffler on it. We'll take the muffler off. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take the cylinder head off. Okay, we got the last of the cylinder head bolts out. Now sometimes these cylinder heads are on tight. Well, that one wasn't. Boy, look at that.
Oh yeah.
All right.
Oh yeah, you told me this yesterday.
Yeah, relax. You're gonna freak out.
Yeah.
All right. So, anyways,
Try to spin it.
you see that oil that's in there?
Yeah.
That should not be in there. So, I'm gonna bring the piston up so we can get that oil out of the cylinder, just so we can get a better look at what's going on here. Ooh, and this crusty stuff here, that's not good either.
Take one of those flathead screwdrivers.
Yeah, no, I don't want to get bogged down in cleaning this thing because we're not repairing this engine. Okay, we're just opening it up so we can see what's going on. All right, so this is obviously the piston.
Yeah.
Okay, and it's going up and down in that cylinder. All right, and it's attached to the crankshaft. The crankshaft has that weird shape to it. You guys have seen a crankshaft
Yeah,
before,
like
right?
like that.
Yeah, so the crankshaft is what allows that up and down motion of the piston to be transferred into rotational, right? Because we need it to rotate to turn gears, wheels, tires, whatever, right? These two things right here are the valves, okay? That one is broken. That's not supposed to come out like that. All right, so there's another obvious
I
thing.
bet that one's gonna come out too.
There's another obvious thing that's wrong with this engine. Okay, so the way that this is normally supposed to work. There we go. All right. The way this is normally supposed to work
bottom
is underneath this cover right here. Oh, you know what? I think I stole some parts out of here. I think that's why it. There you go. All right. See those springs?
Yeah.
See how that one's all fouled up?
You said you stole parts out of there.
Yeah, hold on. I think I can get that spring out now with the.
Needle nose.
Watch out! I don't want. There you go.
I
I don't want to hit you.
was gonna give you a needle nose.
I got it. Springs, right? These are the valve springs. The valve springs are responsible for holding those valves closed. All right. Unless they're being pushed open by a thing inside here, which we're going to see later, called the camshaft. The camshaft has what they call lobes on them. They have these bumps on the shaft. And when the bump comes around and pushes on the underside of this rod right here, the rod pushes on the underside of the valve and does this. It pushes the valve open. Okay? So when this cover, you see there's a space there? There's a space right here where these valves actually come up into. So when this is on here, that creates like a little air space underneath there, right? So what happens is we can actually watch it go right through the cycles. Okay. The piston's up at the top. So if I turn this over, you'll notice that this valve is opening, okay?
They're both open at the same time.
Well, that's because the springs aren't working. But if I put my finger on there so that I can act like the, see it?
Wait, can you do it slowly, please? Slow.
Yeah.
Slower. Okay, stop.
Yeah.
So it's at that point. Go again. Slower. Goes around and then opens. Oh, I just want to see what time this one's open.
So right there, you see how the piston's coming up right there and neither one of the valves is opening?
Mm-hmm.
So both valves would be shut.
It's hitting the air and the
It's
gas.
compressing.
Yeah,
It's the compression stroke. So we know that's the compression stroke right there. So that's the compression stroke right there. And then right about here, you see the magnets are coming by that coil.
It's restarting.
It's going to ignite that
Power
stroke.
Yeah, power
So right about here, you're going to get the bang. Okay. That's the power stroke now. The piston's being driven down fast. Boom, goes down, right? And right when it's getting down near the bottom there, this valve
should open.
is opening. Oh, actually, that's the exhaust valve. That's the exhaust valve. The smaller one is the exhaust valve. Did I say the smaller one was the intake?
Yeah, that's what you called. I
got it mixed up. So now the exhaust valve is opening, and look, the piston's coming back up. It's going to push that. It's going to push water out. So, for Peter's benefit, we're going to repeat this part of the lesson.
Oh, that's pretty good. I missed it.
Oh, good. All right, good. This is cycle number 1. All right. Right now, both valves are closed, and the piston's at the very top of its stroke. Okay. What's the first cycle, Peter? What's the first stroke called? It begins with an I, or we could say S.
Suck.
Thank you. Suck, or the intake stroke. So this larger valve here is the intake valve. Okay? This valve is connected through a port right to this tube right here. You see this port?
Yeah.
That's this tube that comes right over here. That's where the carburetor was hooked up to, right? So what happens is, when this piston starts going down, notice the intake valve is opening up. It's coming up. See it? The intake valve is opening. The piston's going down. This valve is closed. So because the piston's going down and creating a suction, it's going to pull through this open valve, through this tube, through the carburetor. It's going to pull in that air-fuel mixture. What's it going to pull in, Peter?
Air-fuel mixture.
Air-fuel mixture. Piston gets down to the bottom of its stroke, okay?
It's closing.
And the intake valve closes. And now the piston is coming back up. Notice as the piston is coming back up that both valves are now closed. Nothing can come in or out of that cylinder, yet the piston keeps coming up. So what's going to happen to the gases inside that cylinder?
Can I say?
You asking me?
Anybody?
Bang.
Compression. Compression.
You're
So this is the compression stroke. Squeezing the air molecules and the fuel molecules down tight, packing them in there. Okay? It's going to come up on the compression stroke. Pressure's building up in there because it's got no place for it to go because both valves are closed. And right when it gets near the top, okay,
Power stroke.
that's when this magnet comes by and it's going to make that spark plug ignite that compressed air fuel mixture.
That's the bang, right?
That's the bang, which we call the power stroke. So now, bang! Piston gets thrown down really fast, rapidly. That's the power stroke. That's where all the power comes from, okay? As it gets down near the bottom and it gets ready to turn around and come back up, watch what's going to happen. This valve, which is the exhaust valve, now opens. This valve is going to let the gases go out right here, this hole, which is where the muffler was. As the piston comes up, this valve is closed, this one's open. The wasted gas, the byproducts of the burnt fuel, the smoke, all that garbage, it's all going to be pushed out by the piston through here. Now it comes back up. Now look what happens. Both valves close. Both valves close. The piston's going to get ready to go down again. So what's going to happen next?
The intake unit. I mean, out.
Nope. You got it right the first time.
Intake.
We just went through all 4 strokes, so we're going to go back to the first stroke.
Intake's gonna come.
Intake. So the intake valve's going to open and the piston's going to go back down. See it? It opened. Piston's going down. This is suck.
Push.
Valve closes. Piston comes up. Compress.
Oh, compress. Isn't that the same thing as push?
Push.
Boom.
Bang. Goes down.
And you start all over.
Suck.
Number 4. Exhaust valve opens. Blow.
Okay. No, that's number 1's intake.
Okay.
Suck, push, bang, blow.
Okay.
Okay. Suck. Push.
Bang.
Bang. Blow. That's it.
Ta-da.
Whenever you're diagnosing an engine, all right,
Diagnosing Indian. I thought you were gonna say diagnosing.
whenever you're diagnosing an engine that's not running or not running correctly, you have to keep in mind that we need 3 basic things.
Depends on what it is, 2-stroke or 4.
No. On a 4-stroke engine, we're only talking about 4 strokes today.
I know.
On a 4-stroke engine, we need, and actually 2 strokes too.
I know.
but- What?
Combustion or something like
No,
that.
no. We're going to assume that we've got a 4-stroke engine, so we know it's got the 4 cycles.
Spark.
Spark is one thing we need.
I know the rest.
C-
I know the rest.
What does it mean?
What's the spark going to ignite?
I can't say it's like
The
Fuel.
electricity.
Fuel.
Fuel.
No.
Fuel.
Yeah, like it
and
makes
oil.
like
The electricity makes the spark.
oil.
because of the magnets.
Oil.
We need a source of ignition, which is the spark. We need something to ignite, which is the air-fuel mixture. And we need compression.
I was just gonna say compression.
Compression, okay? Because if I just leave this piston down at the bottom here, okay? All the way down the bottom here, and I put this cover on and I throw a little bit of fuel in there and I light it, it's just gonna go, pfft. It's not gonna have much power. But if I take that same little fuel mixture and I bring this up and compress it in there, and then I ignite it, we're gonna have bang. We're gonna have a lot of power. Makes all the difference in the world. We have to have compression. So, when you're diagnosing an engine to see why it's not starting or why it's not running properly, one of the things we want to check is, does it have spark? One of the other things we want to check is, does it have fuel? And one of the other things we want to check is, does it have compression? Okay? Loss of fuel could be, maybe it's out of gas and nobody bothered putting any more in there.
It ain't got no gas in it.
Or maybe there's a blockage or clog.
Like what happened with that one? You had to take all that spray
Yeah,
and put
in
it
the fuel system. Maybe something is clogging the fuel so it's not getting up through the
And what
carburetor.
happened with that one was a lot of rust.
This carburetor has really tiny little passages that the fuel has to flow through, and
You can rust up.
they can, well, rust, dirt, whatever.
nest.
Do we have a fuel system that's working? Is there a blockage? Is there something that's not allowing any fuel to get in there? Okay? That's a possibility. Do we have no spark? Is there something wrong that it's not making spark? That's a possibility. And then the other possibility, which is less common, is
Combustion.
very low or no compression. And the way that can happen is when these engines run, okay? Now if you look at this, if you look at the walls of this cylinder, do you see how smooth they are?
Yeah.
Okay?
That one's not.
No, it's actually pretty good. It's
just-
surprisingly good. Listen, it is.
It is.
I know what I'm talking about. This is the piston out of my old chainsaw. Do you see these ridges right here?
I see him
Yeah.
from here.
Okay, you see how bad they are? That's a bad piston. You see it? You know what that's caused from?
Rubbing
That's
against
caused from rubbing.
So you don't have enough oil.
Right. And in a chainsaw,
two-stroke.
in a two-stroke, you don't have a crankcase like this. This has a crankcase
You just
that's
have a little thing.
this has a crankcase that is filled with oil. Okay? And what happens is when this thing goes down, all right, the crankshaft is actually sloshing the oil around there. And what happens is when this piston comes up, a little bit of oil splashes on the side of the cylinder wall. And that little film of oil is actually what's helping
That's what's
lubricate
right
this
there.
thing. Right, but we're not supposed to see this coming through. So what that means is
gasket.
probably, it's not a gasket. What it is if you look at this piston, you'll see there's two grooves here.
Mm-hmm.
This lower groove is supposed to have a piston ring in it, and the upper one does have a piston ring. So this is a ring. Watch. That's a piston ring. Okay? And there's usually more than one. And what these rings do is, you see how they kind of expand?
Oh, they're
This
made-
piston actually has a little bit of room between the side wall of the cylinder
Yeah.
and the piston. In other words, this diameter of this piston is going to be a little bit smaller than the cylinder it's supposed to fit in.
Yeah.
The reason why is
The oil
because
can get around it.
exactly, you have to have clearance for the oil to get in there. Not only that, but if this fit in there really tight, as soon as this heated up and the
It'll
engine
have so much
started
friction.
running,
It'll
would get hot.
expand.
it would expand, and what would happen?
It would get stuck.
It would get stuck. It would seize.
And then it wouldn't work.
No,
Wouldn't
then
work.
you would have to put cold, keep it in a cold place. We're learning about this.
Well, anyways, the
They're more
point.
expensive.
Listen, the point is, it's designed so that this is made smaller than the bore on purpose. Okay? So if it's smaller than the bore, you need something to keep those exhaust gases, okay, from getting past there. We don't want, when that explosion happens, we don't want that big puff to go down into the crankcase. We want it to be saved in there so it pushes on the piston. We don't waste any power. So these rings sit in here and they expand.
Yeah.
They actually stick out a little bit, and they grab the side walls, and they actually are what makes that seal. These go up and down a bazillion times in the lifetime of an engine, and what happens is they wear.
So you just get new ones.
The rings get worn, and eventually what can happen is the seal isn't very good anymore.
That'll
And then you can have the gases actually start to get by, okay?
And then
You can also have a situation where things get worn so badly that this starts slapping up against the side of the cylinder.
Yeah, but I don't think it's that's small.
just like my
for that
motor
to
from my
happen.
RC.
Well, this would be an exaggeration. Obviously, this is a chainsaw. It's a lot smaller. Pistons
No,
come
I'm
in all
saying I
different
don't
sizes.
think this would be that small for the thing to like move around.
Well, you'd be surprised. These can get worn so bad that that can actually shake back and forth, and there's a very distinct noise that it can make on an older engine, and they actually call it piston slap, because what it is it's this bottom skirt, because the piston's rocking back and forth like that. It's actually this part of the piston's called the skirt.
Skirt.
Yeah, right.
I get it now. The skirt,
What?
the bottom.
What we want to look at next, we talked about how these valves open and close. And you notice they open and close in a very specific order, right?
Yeah.
The 4 cycles, they open and close in a very specific order, and that is because they are being pushed up by 2 lobes on the device called the camshaft. The camshaft is run off of the crankshaft. It's rotating, okay? There's a gear on the crankshaft that actually turns a gear on the camshaft to rotate it. There's a very deliberate relationship between the way those gears are aligned. It's called the timing, valve timing, okay? On cars, your camshaft is a lot longer and it has a lot more of those bumps because you have each cylinder has at least 2 valves. Some cars have 4 valves per cylinder. All right? The reason why they have 4 valves is they would have 2 intakes and 2 exhausts, because by having more valves, instead of having 1 big valve, you could have 2 smaller ones, you can get more air and fuel in there faster, and you can get rid of the exhaust gases faster. It can add to the performance. So that's why you end up with 4 valves per cylinder.
Like Lamborghinis.
Yeah, like a Lamborghini or something like that. But anyways, getting back to this thing. So on a car, you've got so many cylinders, you've got more bumps, more valves, you need more bumps. On some cars, they have multiple camshafts. They might have, like, on one side of the engine, if it's a V8 engine, they might have a camshaft on one side just to run that half, and then another one over here. So instead of having those driven by gears, they might have a chain that goes around the gears and drives off of the crankshaft and runs all of those. Or, like in the Honda and a lot of smaller cars with 4-cylinder and 6-cylinder engines, they have a timing belt. So have you ever heard of a timing belt?
Yeah, just like in my model engine, it has a
timing belt, right. All right. The timing belt does the job of the timing chain. It does the job of these meshing gears, okay? Timing belt is very important. It's a special kind of belt. And if the timing belt breaks, okay, well, yeah, if the timing belt breaks, though, you're going to be stranded wherever you are. That's why on cars, they tell you not to wait for the timing belt to break. After so many miles, and depending on the manufacturer of the automobile, they're going to tell you, after X amount of miles, you should have the timing belt replaced. I'm telling you this because you might own a car someday that has a timing belt, and you want to make sure that if it's supposed to be time to change the timing belt, don't cheap out and not have it done, okay? Because it'll cost you.
better safe than sorry.
Because if you're driving home in the middle of the night on a dark road and the timing belt decides to break, your car will stop running. That's the bare minimum of what will happen. Some engines, okay, well, first let me back up for a second. This is called an L-head configuration, I believe. Okay, the point is, these valves are actually in the cylinder block, okay? On most cars and modern engines, the valves are in the head. So this piece right here,
It's on top.
it sits on the top. These valves would stick through holes in this, and the ports would be here. And then on the top of this would be the camshaft, and the camshaft lobes would turn right here and push those things down.
Oh yeah, just like my model, it has clicking things.
Right, called tappets. Okay, well, actually, those are rocker arms. The little rocker arms. On your model, the reason why you have rocker arms is because there are rods called push rods that stick up that are actually run off. The camshaft in your model is down inside the engine block, okay? Just like this. But the rods, instead of pushing these valves up that are right here, the rods push on those rockers. And the rockers push on the valves, which are in the head, okay? So that's like an improvement over this. In the old days, the first engines, they made them like this for cars. Then they said, oh, let's put the valves in the head, but we got to have the rocker arms so that the push rods can run off the camshaft down here. Then they said, hey, here's an even better idea. We can get rid of the rocker arms and the push rods all together. Let's put the whole camshaft right on top of the head. All right? So the camshaft on like Mummy's car and most modern vehicles, it's on top. All right? We were talking about the timing belt breaking. So imagine these valves are facing down, okay? And on those engines, the valves will be right over the cylinder opening. They'll be right here, okay? Because it's more efficient. The gases will flow more freely by doing it that way. That's the good part. So say on the intake stroke, all right? On the intake stroke or the exhaust stroke, whichever, a valve opens. That valve is going to push down here, right?
Yep.
When the piston comes up to the top right here, on some engines, if the valve is open, there's still a space between the top of this piston and the valve. Got it?
Yeah.
That's called a non-interference engine. An interference engine When the valve is open, if the piston was here in this position, they would hit. They would touch each other. Got it? So here's what happens. Because of the timing, those engines are designed so that while they're running, they make sure those valves are never open when the piston is at the top, coming up to the top, okay? But what happens if your timing belt breaks on that engine? You're running down the road, your engine's going, right? However many RPMs, and all of a sudden the timing belt lets go. When the timing belt lets go, the camshaft stops turning. And one of those valves might be open. So now the valve is open, there's nothing to close it, but guess what's still turning?
Your motor.
The crankshaft.
Yeah, the crankshaft, yeah.
So the piston comes up and it hits the valve and bends the valve. And sometimes it can bend it into the head and damage the head. So now you go from, oh, I don't know, say a $250 repair job to have a new timing belt replaced to, oh, well, you got a bad head, so you've got to replace the head on your car. And now all of a sudden, you know,
600.
well, even more, depending on what it is. And sometimes,
Probably about $1,000.
you know, sometimes if it's a really old engine, you know, if you got a lot of miles on it, sometimes it's not even worth putting a head on it. You just go to the junkyard and try and find another engine, if you're lucky. Some cars, though, it's hard to find engines for.
Like a Lamborghini.
All right, so Aiden just took the carburetor assembly off of the top of the fuel tank. And you can see this is the pickup tube. It's got a little screen on the bottom right there. So this sticks down inside the fuel tank. And then what happens is there's a vacuum. When the engine creates that vacuum on the intake stroke, it sucks air in through here. And as that air is running past the little tiny port where the gas comes out, it creates a little vacuum on that port, and it sucks the little bit of gas droplets up and through there. Okay? And the way it does that is, the way that this opening that goes through the carburetor, this little tunnel, it's made a very specific way. It's got a very specific shape to it. And that unusual shape creates something that they call the Venturi effect.
I think we can see it through.
That weird shape tunnel in there is called a Venturi. All right?
Mm-hmm.
And what happens is, as the air is running through, okay, that tunnel will open up a little bit in size. So what happens is there's a sudden low pressure area that's developed right above where that jet is, where the gas is, and that low pressure causes the gas to want to come up and out and enter that stream of air.
Mm-hmm.
That's on a carbureted engine. Most of these small engines are carbureted. And earlier cars and tractors were all carbureted. But on modern engines, they use something completely different. They use something called fuel injection, electronic fuel injection, EFI for short.
Into the carburetor, right?
Oh, no, they don't even bother having a carburetor at all. What they do is they have a port right on the cylinder at the head, where they have the injector, which is a special device that's going to squirt the fuel right into the cylinder, and that's attached right to the head. So what you get is, instead of having the air coming through the carburetor, picking up the droplets of fuel and going into the engine, what you have is the air is coming through something that is kind of like a carburetor. It's got a butterfly in there to control the amount of airflow. Okay, it's called the throttle body. The fuel is being injected directly into the cylinder. And by doing it that way, it's a lot more efficient. The burn is a lot cleaner. So when you have that bang with the power stroke, you have very little wasted fuel. When this engine's running, on that exhaust stroke, you remember I said all the smoke and everything's coming out? There's also unburnt fuel that comes out. It's wasted. All right? So on a fuel injected engine, you have a computer in the car, and it's monitoring the exhaust gases, the amount of oxygen that's available in the air coming in. It's monitoring all these different things, and it's controlling the amount of fuel that's being sent to the engine based on how it's monitoring the RPMs of the engine, how fast is the engine spinning, It's monitoring the position of the throttle. If you're in the car and you put your foot down, you stop that down, and that throttle's wide open, the computer is getting a message saying, hey, somebody really wants this thing to go out fast. And so then it starts dumping a lot of fuel into those. It makes those injectors really put a lot of spray of fuel in
the,
there.
Thing in a top of a car that people put
Well, I think you're thinking of what's called a supercharger.
No, the top thing. It's like, it's a hood and then it comes up and like that.
The scoop?
Yeah.
All the scoop does is help get the air into the carburetors faster, or the supercharger. What a supercharger does is, you remember how he said that piston's going to compress that air? What a supercharger does is it makes sure that on that intake stroke, that even more air is crammed in there. So you have even more air molecules and fuel molecules in there. So that when that compression stroke happens, you have even more energy available. So when that fires, it makes a big bang. Turbocharger does the same thing, but a turbocharger has one turbine that makes that pressurized air, but that turbine is spun by the exhaust gases. Okay, so it's like free energy. On a supercharger, the turbine that's in there that's actually making that air flow, and it's a different design. I don't want to overcomplicate things, but that's being turned by the engine. It's directly run off of a pulley off the crankshaft. Superchargers, the big ones, like on hot rods and that, they call them blowers. Okay? That's all it is. It's a big blower. And they usually were big things, and back in the day, guys wanted to show off that they had a blower on their car, so they would cut a hole in the hood, and the thing would stick up out of the hood and have one of those scoops you're talking about on the top and look real cool. You still see them sometimes on dragsters. If you ever watch dragsters, those cars that go straight down the thing really quick. Lots of times they'll have blowers on
I
them.
just saw one a couple days ago.
A dragster?
No, what's it called?
A blower?
Yeah. In Midnight Club, the game we have,
Yeah.
you can buy what are they called? Like the.
What happened? Why did it sound like that?
This is a recoil thing. It's because you don't want this to be spinning constantly, because it would break the heck out of this thing.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I'm probably gonna need a puller. You know what? Do you see what you're doing right there, prying that up? Let me tell you, you never ever want to pull a flywheel off by trying to pry it off the way you did.
Why?
Just there. It will break almost every time. This kind of metal that this is made out of, it's a cast metal. It's very brittle. It does not want to flex the slightest bit. So when you pry up over here, what ends up happening is you're prying here, but you're not prying here at the same time. See, a puller will grab both sides and try and pull straight up. You have less chance of breaking it with a puller. But usually what they do is they put threaded holes on here. And what you're supposed to do, I believe they're right here. See those holes?
Mm-hmm.
You put in a bolt and you tighten the bolt down, and as the bolts go down through the flywheel, they'll push on something behind there and pop it up. Now, that being said, hold on. That being said, we don't care about this motor, so I don't care if you break the flywheel. So if you want, go ahead and try and pry it. Nope.
You're gonna need my strength.
Yeah,
your
well,
smell. You get a history.
You're gonna hold it down?
let me try. I'm trying to get hit in the face with a piece of the flywheel that's going to go flying when that snaps.
Oh my gosh, what is in there?
Yeah, it's stuck on there pretty good. The other thing you can do is this. Look, see how this moves in and out?
Yeah.
We wedge something in here so that it can't move down, like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then we bang on, which again, normally I would never suggest banging on this shaft.
I'm gonna do it. Okay, right?
Yeah, go ahead.
Right here?
Yeah.
It's not moving.
No, it's been on there a long time. Give it some credit. There you go, try that.
I'm gonna hit hard, okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, it moved. A lot.
Yeah, alright, keep going. Alright, stop. It's off. That's it.
Oh, look at the key.
Yeah, that's called the keyway. This is what keeps this on the shaft in a very particular relationship. The magnets go by the coil at a very specific time, do they not?
Yes, they do.
When the ignition's going to happen, right? When the piston's almost at the very top, when it's compressed. If we just put this on here any old way, how are we going to ensure that it's going to happen at the right moment?
We're not.
The reason why I'm pointing this out is because sometimes what can happen is this can break.
You have to get a new one then.
If this breaks, this can sometimes rotate out of position.
Yeah.
Then what happens is, when you go to start it, the ignition happens before the piston's all the way up. And what can happen is if it fires, it will rip that cord out of your hand. This. You go to pull this and all of a sudden this goes and rips out of your hand violently. It's because what happened is the piston was on its way up, but before it got to where it's supposed to be, the engine fires because of the ignition timing being off. It throws the piston down and the engine runs in the wrong direction. I mean, just for a fraction of a revolution, but enough to tear your knuckles out. All right, where we left off when the video card was filling up was we had pulled the flywheel off. We were getting ready to remove this cover, and I was quizzing Aiden as to whether or not he remembered way back when we started this whole discussion, if he remembers what is going to be underneath this cover. And I gave him a hint that it was part of the ignition system, had to do with controlling when the spark's going to happen. Began with the letter P.
I can't get it. Won't come to mind.
Point.
Close.
Pointer.
Points.
Oh, points.
Points. Acts like a little switch. Open it up, we'll take a look.
That looks brand new.
Right, because that cover's doing its job and it's keeping all the crap out of there. So what we've got is underneath this part right here where we can't see it, there's something on this crankshaft that will cause this small little rod right here to move and do this.
And what that's supposed to do?
Right there,
Oh.
right there and there, those are two electrical contacts. That switch is open right there and that's closed. Open, closed. So it's doing this
So if you
when the engine's running. So every time that bump comes around and pushes this open, that's when it's going to make a spark. It has to happen right when those magnets are going by that coil, and then this is going to open. And then this thing right here, the cylinder thing, this is called a condenser. What the condenser does, for lack of a better explanation, it's like an electric shock absorber. When these contacts open, there's a spark, okay? And if this condenser wasn't there, the spark would be so strong it would cause damage to the contacts. So they wouldn't run very long before they started to burn away. The arc would literally burn the metal away. It would vaporize the metal on that contact. So what this does is this kind of softens that blow, and it protects these contacts from burning up. So if you have bad points on a car and you replace the points and then the points burn up really quickly, you want to check and see if it's your condenser's your problem. If the condenser shorts out, that can actually kill the ignition altogether. But that's basically, so inside the tractor we've got the distributor with the distributor cap. If we take the distributor cap off and look inside there, we would actually see points. And we're going to see them because when I go to work, when I go to restart that tractor, we're going to definitely have to get into that ignition because the distributor cap is loose for some reason.
Which tractor are you talking about?
That red one.
Oh.
Probably water got in there. All right, so we're almost done here with our lesson on how the four-stroke engine works. I literally had to bust the case into pieces on this motor to get this out because this part right here of the crankcase, the seal got hung up on the shaft. I just didn't have the patience to deal with taking it apart properly, knowing full well that I had no intention of trying to save this engine. So what I was able to do though was I was able to get out the key components that were in the crankcase, which are, all right, help me out guys, what's this piece here?
Piston rod.
Crankshaft.
Crankshaft.
Thank you, crankshaft. That's all right, don't worry about it, I'll just use this. All right, well, and this, what's this?
Piston.
Piston. What do you think these things are here? I
Grooves.
talked
Oh,
about
the
them.
seal thing.
Seal, yeah. No,
Yeah.
the thing so you can.
They're called piston
oils.
what's?
Or-
Piston
Caps.
R,
Not ro-
R-I,
right.
R-I-N,
Uh,
R-I-N-G.
rings.
Thank you. All right, these are the piston rings. You can see how they stick out past the piston a little bit,
Yeah.
okay?
Those 3.
So that's what keeps that nice and tight, makes a good seal in there when they're working correctly, okay?
Working correctly.
Well, these are probably kind of worn.
And the licking oil.
All right. Now, unlike the chainsaw where you only had 2 regular solid rings, this one has a solid ring, and then you see this funny looking ring right here? It's almost like 2 pieces with the grooves in it. That's called an oil control ring. So that ring is trying to keep the oil in the crankcase down inside the crankcase instead of getting into the combustion chamber. Because if it gets in the combustion chamber and it burns oil, you'll get blue-gray smoke coming out of the exhaust pipe. Sometimes you see really old engines doing that. It's because they're burning oil. Okay? So this right here that connects the piston to the crankshaft is called the connecting rod. Okay? This pin, okay, you see where I'm pointing?
Yeah.
This pin is called a wrist pin because kind of like the way your wrist works, it's a pivot point right there, right? Well, the piston pivots on the rod on that pin, okay? This is the gear.
A gear.
This is the gear that
gear.
drives the camshaft. This is the camshaft gear, okay? And it's part of camshaft.
Yeah.
See those bumps I was talking about?
They're hitting the part in there that were hitting these.
Right, so look. So as this turns around, those bumps come up, right? And they're going to push on these little things right here. When this comes around, it's going to push this up.
And then it's gonna hit.
And then this is going to hit this valve and push the valve open. And then the springs that we saw,
Right
they
there, right there, right there.
they make the valve come back down and stay nice and tight and closed, okay? Another problem you can have with low compression is, you see these valves?
Yeah.
How they're all really
Yeah.
messy?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, if they don't make a good seal when they're closed, okay, they can cause a loss of compression.
Okay.
So you can have problems with the valves or the piston and cylinder and piston rings. All of those things can cause low compression or poor compression. Sometimes in a real severe case, something can really go bad with the engine. You can actually end up with a hole right through the piston. Then you'll have no compression, and that motor won't run. Unless it's like a 4-cylinder and one of them's bad, then the other 3 might run, but it'll run real rough because it's running, all messed up. So you guys think you have a pretty good idea on
Yep. How I'm gonna
how a
take
4-stroke engine works?
Yeah.
So what are the 4 cycles called?
I know.
Go ahead. First cycle is,
Suck.
yep,
Second one is like
it's
Push.
it sucked it in. Press, compression,
compression.
Yeah.
And then boom,
bang,
bang.
the power stroke, yep.
Yeah, and then there's gonna be the exhaust.
Exhale, gonna blow.
Like this, like.
Oh, let me show you one other thing. Remember I talked about how as this is going up and down,
Yeah.
there has to be a very definite relationship between this gear and this gear. We can't just put this in any old way. If we were reassembling this engine, we would have to make sure that the teeth on this gear mesh with the teeth on this gear in a very particular way. So somewhere on this gear, there'll be something to...
I can maybe read it. Nope.
Oh, right there. See that little... You see that little dimple right there?
Yeah.
That's all that dimple is. You see how it's lined up with that right between those 2 teeth?
Mm-hmm.
So somewhere on this crankshaft here, right there, you see that little line?
Yeah.
That little line right there in the tooth? So if we were to put this back together, to make sure we put it back together correctly, we would put that line pointing right at that little bump. And that would be correctly valve timed. Because there's 2 types of timing. There's valve timing. That's the relationships of the valves opening and closing to the piston going up and down. That's valve timing. And then there's ignition timing. Ignition timing is the relationship between the position of the piston and the valves being open and closed as a unit to the time that the spark happens on the power stroke. So you got two different kinds of timing: ignition timing and valve timing. Ignition timing can be affected by several different things. Valve timing, unless you have like a timing belt and it like jumps a couple of teeth because the belt has teeth on it, or a timing chain that jumps a couple of teeth, or if it was put together incorrectly in the first place, that's the only time you're going to really see the problem with valve timing. Now on modern engines, some engines even have what they call variable valve timing, which is amazing.
Does it on its own.
What it is there's a way for the gear. See this gear?
Yeah.
See how this gear is attached to this shaft permanently?
Yeah.
It's fixed to the shaft.
Mm-hmm.
On those special engines, there's a way for this gear to turn independently of the shaft a slight amount, which can actually change the valve timing.
Mm-hmm.
They do that in like fancy engines like in BMWs and Mercedes
And we're juniors.
and all kinds of cars now, I guess. Whatever. All right, that's it. That concludes the lesson. What do you guys think?
I'm ready to take apart the motor.
Ready for you? Well, okay. Now,
Wait, so I go.
are we taking it apart
No,
though?
no, we're fixing
Why
it.
would we take it apart?
We're fixing
We're
it.
fixing
Right,
it.
right. So
I
next
think I already know what's
the
happening.
next time we do a video together, we're gonna work on. We're gonna individually gonna break up. Okay. And what you're gonna do is you're each gonna tackle one of the junk lawnmowers that we got.
One of mine that
Yeah.
I'm fixing.
Yeah.
Do you think the
Well, you know what you want? We'll take a sneak peek at them right now.
okay?
All right.
Do you think?
All right, so this is one of the two lawnmowers that I was driving by a house, and these were sitting out front, and they had a sign on them and it said free. And first I thought, well, I don't want any more junk hanging around the house. But then I thought, you know what, this would be a good learning opportunity for the kids. So now that we've given them a crash course on 4-cycle engines, in the next series of videos, what we'll probably end up doing is we'll tackle trying to get these run. Getting these to run, but let's take a quick look, just do a quick assessment on it. So what happens when you pull that pull starter, Aiden? Oh, not too good, doesn't want to move, huh? So what do you think's happening there?
The crankshaft shaft is stuck.
The crankshaft is stuck. Well, what do you think would be holding the crankshaft from moving though?
Piston.
The piston's not wanting to go up and down the cylinder, so that's not a good sign because that might be a seized engine. Now, maybe it's not seized from overheating or running it without oil in it. Maybe it's just stuck from sitting so long. Maybe this was sitting outside for a long time and the people just didn't get around to getting rid of it right away. If it's that, then we might be able to squirt some oil in through the spark plug hole and lubricate that cylinder and maybe get it to break free. That would be good if we can do that.
Or you might need to have a new piston.
Yeah, which for this mower is not worth doing.
What if that piston?
Game over, man. Game over.
And then
It's over,
We're not
Johnny.
going to tear into this to that level. Trust me, we're not taking it apart to that level. Hopefully we're gonna get this running, and then you know what we'll do? We'll advertise it and sell it real cheap. And then if that doesn't work, scrap metal it is.
Or
All right,
or
let's take a look at the other one.
Oh my, this is stuck to
All right, so this is the other one. So go ahead, Aiden, give that a shot. Ah, this one turns over.
probably need just gas.
It ain't got no gas in it.
Yeah, I'm sure. They ran it out of gas, and then they said, "Oh, we don't know how to put gas in. We don't even know it uses gas."
Or they bought a brand new one.
Yeah. I doubt it's just out of gas. All right. All right. Until next time, say bye to everybody.
Bye-bye.
Huh?
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.
You see there, Scooter? Thinks of the simplest things first.